I didn't think I would have to make this video, but I guess we'll have to start the podcast off with this. Um, I know everyone's been asking and wondering what my feelings are and what side I'm on of everything. And despite being, close with both sides, I would just really want to take this moment to announce that I am not going to be taking a side in the Drake Kendrick beef. All right, with that, let's get back to the podcast. I did not think I would have to announce that, but 2024, here we are. Let's get into some of the best hallucinations that I've had that Drake and Kendrick haven't had. So maybe their beef should be with me. Wow, I'm so tired. It's been like 9 days since it's 250-mile race, and bounce back has been slow, but I hit some PT today, so I'm getting ready. I thought I was going to open this thing up talking about an NDA I just signed for a upcoming project, but I recently found out that it does not stand for new data announcement. So I'm not supposed to talk about that. So I think we'll just move right into some fun stories and stuff. I think the schedule I'm going to keep is maybe one solo episode a week and one with guests, and just see how things go. But I am still hitting up the audience for those 5-star reviews. Thanks for everyone listening. And if you're here today, you're probably here to hear an intro and some more bumper music. But I'm just a solo person behind a microphone here. I've actually had this microphone since 2018 because that's how long I've thought that I would become a podcaster. And then once I realized you just don't really even have to wear clothes to be a podcaster, I realized that I was really in. So on the verge of everything turning to bread at Cocadona through Hallucinations, and just being incredibly tired again today and yesterday and the day before and pretty much every day lately, I thought I would just go into telling some stories of some of my favorite hallucinations that I've had throughout the years. And some of them are reoccurring. Hallucinations are pretty funny. I did no research. I don't know why these happen, but it seems to happen pretty consistently when you push. For me, I can get through one night pretty easy. Not a big deal to skip a night of sleep. Can even bump up to that 40, 48 hours level. But after that, man, hallucinations come quick. And even in other adventures, when it's 20 to 30 minutes of sleep a night, by the last night, if it's a 3-day thing, I will start seeing things. So my first hallucination was when I was doing the Nolan's 14 route as part of the Great Western Loop. So it's a 14,000 foot peaks through Colorado. In Colorado, it's like a 100-mile route. It's pretty much off trail. There's some connector trails in there too. But I decided I wanted to try this while I was on the Continental Divide Trail. I'd scouted some of it when I lived in Denver leading up to it. I had a pretty good idea of how to connect everything. I'd always thought of going for the FKT on it. Never have. Probably never will. It's pretty hard. But anyways, it's 2018. I'm through hiking the Great Western Loop. I'm probably about, I don't know, 6,000 miles into it. And I'm getting near Leadville, Colorado. And this is when I finally make the decision. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to do this 100-mile route with 14,000 foot peaks. Burp, sorry. 14,000 foot peaks. It has an elevation gain that's a lot. I didn't look it up for this podcast. I do not look up things ahead of time. We just ramble here and hope that everyone sticks around. So I get to the crossing, and I believe it's Tennessee Pass. I go into Leadville. I pick up some caffeine, and that's it. I take my whole thru-hiker setup out. I hike to within a mile of the fish hatchery where Nolan's 14 starts. I go to sleep, wake up the next morning, hike the last mile, and then I start my Nolan's 14 attempt. And it's pretty rough. I shoot up. Is it massive? I think it's massive. And then you drop way down, and then you climb this one section of Mount Elbert to get up the backside that's 2,100 feet in a mile. So this is pretty hard, but I'm doing it all through hiker style. I have pulls. I have my sleeping bag, tent. I even had a stove and everything. So I'm doing it a little different. It's actually an ultra runner challenge, but I wanted to break 60 hours. That's kind of the baseline of saying you completed the challenge. So I get through that. I go, man, I can't even remember the names of the peaks in order. But after 2 days of doing this, I slept about 30 minutes the first night. Like I turned my brain into FKT ultra runner mindset, and I'd never done an FKT. The only ultra marathon I'd done was a year before I did a 50K. So a little different mindset than pushing for 60 hours. So sleep some on the first day. And then as I get into that second night where nothing's flat on this trail, climbing up, and I start seeing this safari figure. It's like probably a 4 foot tall guy in that tacky colored uniform on a safari. He has a white mustache, white hair, and like I don't know any official names for hats, but he has a hat that looks like a bowl on. And he just stares at me as I walk by. And then I go a couple more miles. There he is again. And he just persisted throughout the entire rest of Nolan's 14. When I came down Shivano to the finish, it's like maybe 6 or 8 miles downhill of running. I would just see him standing on a rock around every corner. It seems like he's always standing on a rock. So this is my safari guy. I've gotten to know him. This is one of probably my earliest hallucination from sleep deprivation. We'll just leave that there. But then he keeps popping up, like on the John Muir Trail when I was around Ray Lakes. I came around the corner and there is my friend just standing on a stump staring at me. He doesn't really move, but he does move his head a little bit. And it's really weird because the rest of the world is very vivid. I can tell what's real and what's fake. I know he's fake, but he is very real standing there just staring at me. Actually, on the John Muir Trail, I made a video where there was a safari guy. If I can find out how, I'll try to drop that sound in here. No guarantees though. So that was my first hallucination story, and this guy has stuck with me through thick and thin. And he's not scary. It's just weird and out of place. I don't know where he comes from, except for when I was little, I had nightmares of Jumanji and the safari guy there that shoots everything up. I think that maybe that could be the baseline for where this scary figure comes from. Okay, that's story number 1. I think I'm going to do 5 of these. We'll see how it goes. Story number 2. So my first big FKT that I chased, trained for, was nervous about, didn't think I could really get. Well, I don't know. Plus or minus, who knows when you go after these things, it's always scary to put yourself out there knowing it might be 2 weeks and not get your goal. But anyways, was the Arizona Trail FKT. I believe I already talked a little bit about training for that in past episode. I could go into it, but it's pretty boring. All you do is like walk and run. That's training. Ultra running. Woo. Okay, so I did, like, the first week was maybe 365 miles. I'm still able to sleep 4 hours a night, which is for my level of sleeping, which is usually 6 hour a night sleeper. I know it's sad. Probably why I'm so tired lately. I was able to maintain, and I always break these FKTs into thirds. So the first third wanted to maintain, and I pushed it up to a week of getting 4+ hours of sleep a night, feeling good. And then the second half of that FKT is where everything crumbled. My foot actually had this big gash, and I walked into Pine, Arizona and bought super glue from the store and just super glued the whole bottom of my foot so that it would hold up the rest of the way. But anyways, pushed pretty good, staying on pace, had a couple bad days, but was able to overcome them. See, I'm doing this to learn how to talk gooder. Okay, and I get to the Grand Canyon. I crossed the entire thing at night. I started it at 8 p.m. and then I took a nap on the other side, just permitting stuff and all that. But I get there, and then there's like 70 miles left, 90 miles left, somewhere in there. I did not write down facts. That's for you guys to fact check me. Just kidding. No one needs to. So let's just call it 78 miles. That sounds good. And like 30 or 40 of this is snow. I've heard this and read it on the comments on the Far Out guide. So I know that I'm going to be going through snow. I know I'm going to be pushing really hard. And so I start cutting down my sleep to like 30, 45 minutes of sleep for that last night, I guess it would be. And I've already given up sleep the night before because of the Grand Canyon. And this is when it's either a full moon or really close to it. And things got really weird out there. The shadows from the full moon on the snow, because I'm walking and post holing on the snow, it was incredibly taxing and frustrating. It was hard, and I'm just trying to hold on to this schedule because at this point I have a shot at the overall FKT, breaking the supported record, and I was able to. But so this second to last night, all the shadows turned into witches. The trees turned into witches. Their shadows, like, they just had big brooms, and it felt like they were waiting to sweep me up. So think of like a trail lined with pine trees, because it's on, I guess it's still the Cocadona Plateau, even though it's past the Grand Canyon up there. Who knows if that's correct or not either. But the trail is just lined with witches, just stereotypical pointed hats. They had their big brooms made of twigs, and they're like 100 feet tall because the trees are the witches. And that was one of the freakiest moments. I wouldn't say that I completely lost it. And just even having that experience of knowing the safari guy and a little bit of hallucinations and the experience in the past of Nolan's 14, I kind of knew that these cracks in reality would start. I just didn't know how vivid they could get. So I'm just seeing witches. I never could see their face, was the weird thing. Even like the smaller trees that are like 12 feet tall, they were witches too. And their hats were just shading their face, covered in brooms. It was all at night. And at this point, I think I took like a little bit of a nap. They were still there when I woke up, but daylight came and I was able to close that sucker out before the next night. But that was one of the scarier interactions, and just realizing how vivid your world can become when sleep deprivation and hallucinations happen. So on to story number 3. This one happened at Cocadona last year, so 2023, and things just got really weird really quick 2 different times. So we'll just combine stories 3 and 4. So I was coming into, would have been Deer Pass, I believe, right after Dead Horse State Park, and it's dark, let's call it midnight, and I've been up. I skipped the first night of sleep. That's always my Cocadona plan. Through the first night of sleep, and I always think I'm going to be able to make it through the second night without any sleep too. And that's always when the hallucinations start. So I'm going along, and then I like to call it the earthquake feeling. So the ground starts to shake. It feels like I'm in an earthquake. Can't really figure out what's going on. And then I start seeing things. First, I look over, and there's chicken feet sticking up out of the ground. So they're just like the 3-toed things that chickens have, and they're just for hundreds of feet, as if they've been planted there. These chicken feet are just sticking straight up out of the ground, as if they're lining my pathway to what I'm going to. And I like try to shake my head a little bit, try to clear it up. I know it's a hallucination, but I just am mesmerized by it. My pacer Zach is just like, "What are you looking at?" And I told him that there's chicken feet everywhere. So we get through that. There's probably like 4 miles left to Deer Pass. And by then, I think either I or Zach had texted the crew that I'm going to sleep there, going to get rid of the hallucinations with a little bit of sleep. All it takes is usually 20 or 30 minutes to be back on track, but we still have 4 miles. So that's plenty of time for new stuff to present itself. Couldn't tell you why the chicken feed, except for growing up, we always had chickens. So maybe they're a part of my deep, deep, dark, buried memories of just seeing chickens out there. I don't know. Those chickens are still with me. My sister would paint their toenails and name them, and had chicken shows and stuff like that. But fresh eggs my whole childhood. Maybe that's why I'm big and strong today. So get past the chicken feet, and then the next thing that presents itself is this massive pirate ship. Think like Pirates of the Caribbean, like 3 masts, like couple 100 feet long or more, just massive thing, just does not belong out there in the desert. But it was. Like Zach, I just stopped and was staring at it, and Zach asked what I was staring at, and that's when I told him that there was in fact a pirate ship just sitting out there in the middle of the field that we're walking by, and I just couldn't figure out why it was there. And I think with his personality, he just laughed and I don't know if he said anything or not, but I remember just staring at that thing for a while. Like I could see all the details. It had cannons, it had a mast, it had sails that were up, had like the rigging and stuff. I didn't see any people on it. So it looked like it was abandoned, maybe from when the earth flooded like 1900 million years ago. Maybe not. But that was one of the weirder ones. I don't often see things that are that big, but that was a pretty massive hallucination of an object that I could not conceptualize. So got through that, got to the next aid station, slept, good to go. But the next hallucination from last year's Cocadona, I hallucinated a lot last year's Cocadona, which is weird because this year I actually slept less over the 68 hours. I think I only got like 20 minutes. And this year, things only turned to bread. And that's not threatening. No big deal. Just bread overall. I did see some loggers and things on the side of the road. And that was in the daylight, which is a little more rare. Usually just that safari guide joins me in the daylight. He's kind of my guiding compass to get through these hard efforts during the day. But this time, well, there was like abandoned logging equipment and some logs stacked up. So I can conceptualize the connection that I made this year. Anyways, back to last year, the I got this. Okay, there's this section that is really hard for me from Fort Tuthill to Walnut Canyon. It's like mile 210 to 230 basically, and it's this 20-mile section between aid stations, and you're 200 plus miles into the race, so you're already pretty tired, exhausted, ready to be done. And most of the aid stations up to this point are a lot shorter than 20 miles. So it's just a hard section to do. You know you're going to be out there for a while. If you're moving good, maybe 3.5, 4 hours. If you're not, 4.5, 5 hours. Last year, it took me like 6.5 hours because it was at night. I ran out of Fort Tuthill chugging a Red Bull, just trying to get any amount of energy. This late in a race, you're just trying anything. This year, I tried like yerba mate, Red Bull, Coca-Cola, coffee, anything that would just give a bump of energy. But this late in the race, nothing works. You're just trying it and trying to trick your body that it's actually going to work. So anyways, chug a Red Bull and me and Calvin start running. And it's the classic, like, oh, I feel good. We're going to get this section done. I probably ran about 10-minute miles for the first 6 miles, like really, really good first hour, feeling optimistic. And then everything just cascaded. You join or you hit like an intersection either near or on the Arizona Trail in that area. And there's this big cliff off to the left. I think you're near Fisher Point, maybe a little bit past it. And this big cliff, it's dark out. Our headlights are shining. There might have been a little bit of moonlight, but I look over at this cliff and there is this giant robot just embedded in it. And I just stopped in my tracks. This is kind of more according to Calvin. I stopped and I'm just staring at it, just like trying to figure out what in the world a robot is doing embedded in this cliff. It's massive. I would say like 3 stories high. It's as big as the cliff. And it's just like sitting in the cliff as if it's like a relic from a past time or something. It's like a fossil just set in there. And I'm trying to decipher why in the world it's there. I'm looking at all its features. It's pretty normal robot looking. It's square in shape. It's got like little arms and legs. It's very much like a 90s cartoon style robot, but I can't figure this out. And Calvin eventually goes, "What are you looking at?" And it's like, "Oh, there's like a robot over there in the cliff. It's so weird." And he's like, "All right, let's keep going." So he pulled me out of that mesmerized state and back into reality. So continued on. That section was really rough. Had to walk a bunch of it, sit down. I actually got passed on that section, which is always frustrating, 30 miles from the end. But when you're seeing robots, it's sometimes hard to come back from that. Okay. And now we'll go with one final hallucination story. I don't know how long any of these episodes will be, but, hopefully entertaining enough, long enough to keep your attention and not too long, just with a few stories. I'm not a huge talker, which is probably why a podcast is the perfect medium for me. So on the Colorado Trail, 9 days, it was 9.5 days. Oh, also plug, movie is out now. Uh, if you want to watch it, it's free on Tubi. You can just look up Free Outside. I think Tubi's under Amazon or something like that. So you can watch a movie for free. I've seen it enough, but I don't even remember if I speak much about the hallucinations. But, anyways, throughout the last 3 or 4 years, I've had a lot of things where stumps turn into different things when I'm hallucinating. And on this, I did my normal style. The first third of the trail, maintain. So 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night, trying to hit 50 miles per day or more. And then the second third, you drop your sleep a little bit, or at least this is my strategy. And then you really push it in that last third. So this would have been 3 day chunks if I'm breaking it into thirds. And then once I got to that last 3 day chunk, I would say I jumped the gun a little bit on the final sprint to the finish. It's so hard to muster the energy to push through the night, especially when you've given your body lack of sleep leading up to this point. And once I finally did, I suffered. So there's just a lot of stumps in the woods. I don't know if you guys know that. There's just like trees that have fallen over and there's an old stump. But these things started morphing into black bears. And they would be bears that would be just looking at me as I'm going by, like a little too close for comfort. So it would be a little bit worrisome. I'd be going down the trail, trying to eat something, maybe even throwing in music. It's unsupported, so I've had no human contact other than the occasional hiker out on the trail. But then out of nowhere, I would just see a stump and then I'd jump a little bit, like that fear when you hear a rattlesnake or you actually see a bear or moose, as you just have that little spike of adrenaline. And every time it would be caused by a black bear just standing by, staring at me from the trail. And this persisted for, I don't know, the last 2 nights probably. Is I could barely keep my eyes open, and then I'd be going along, and then bam, another black bear. And then like falling asleep while walking again, try to eat some food, get some nutrition in, and then bam, there's another black bear. So that was a really weird occurrence. I've had mostly the safari guides who were standing on the stumps, but this time the actual stumps turned into things. I can't really figure out why it was black bears. I've never had any fear of bears. I've actually had some, excuse me, another burp there. Actually had some pretty good interactions with bears. Probably a good story for another episode. Just been charged by a grizzly in between a mama bear and her cub, mama black bear and her cub when I was like 7 years old. That was a pretty cool parenting moment. My parents had to figure out how to get us out of safety since it was me and my brother and we were like too young to do anything on our own. Yeah, maybe I'll tell that story a different time. But anyways, I can't really figure out why the black bears came up. I've never had a fear other than a healthy respect, as you should always have for things in the wild. But yeah, those are my 5 hallucination stories. We have the safari man, we have the witches on the Arizona Trail. That's probably the scariest. And then we have the chicken feet and the pirate ship sticking out of the ground, the robot stuck in a cliff, and the stumps. And where I'm going with all this, other than just being a podcast where we ramble about things, is lately I've started plugging these into Chat GPT and getting it to recreate the scenario or the scene that was in my mind. And it's pretty fun because then you can just show people what you were seeing in your mind, because especially if you have a pacer at times like this, it's pretty fun to show them like, look, here is what I was seeing out there. It was a robot stuck inside a cliff. That's why I was staring so hard. Or the pirate ship one is pretty funny. And so I'll probably drop a link in the show notes to those. Not quite sure how that goes. As for a life update, I don't know if anyone asks or anyone cares or what that's all about. Yeah, I went to the doctor. We're changing major subjects here, which I feel like I'll be doing a lot on this podcast anyways. But I went to the doctor because my leg is still quite swollen, and it's so swollen they wanted to take an x-ray. This is like a week after finishing Cocadona. I didn't stick around. Actually, they're like, oh, you can go back to the room and wait on the results. It was like 10 minutes, and he's like, I don't have time for this. I just walked out of the office and thought, well, they'll call me if anything's wrong. And then went to PT for the first time today. And I think the normal flexion you're supposed to have in your like ankle or Achilles is like 30, 35, 40%. I think it's 40%. I think my other leg's like 45%. My bad leg, my right leg, the flexion on it, I think we topped out at around 18%. So I'm working with, I guess that would be a little quick math, almost, so a little bit over 1/3 the mobility. So got those PT exercises. The plan is to work on that moving forward. And by the time this comes out, which is like only in a couple days from now, the another cool race. So big on all these obscure races from like, now we've all heard of Barkley, probably the Barkley marathons. You haven't, maybe I'll do an episode on that, but it's a pretty seasonal thing. And that already blew up my TikTok. So I don't need to go too deep into Barkley anymore. And there's big backyard. Last person standings are pretty cool. But there's this race that one of the athletes I coach is doing called Infinitus 888K. Now, I haven't Googled the conversion or come up with how far 888K is, but I think it's around 550 miles. And competitors have 10 days to do it. And it's like a 17-mile loop and a 9-mile loop. And you just keep doing these loops until time is up, 10 days, or you've done 888 kilometers. I don't know why we measure in kilometers. I thought we had this obscure imperial measurement system that works so well. But anyways, a lot of 8s in that race. So that started, and I was able to Google around and find like a Google Doc that tracks it, but it's pretty fun doing that. I also had an athlete do a last person standing, 2 different ones over the last couple months, and it's pretty funny. There's the Cocadona style of live streaming or trackers that update every so often, and you can follow the athletes as they move down the course, or there's these ones which are a Google Doc updated with like the last person standing. They would update it with the time each lap, and this one they update it with the time for each loop, and it just keeps going for days. It just feels like a nightmare to direct a race of that duration. But anyways, that pretty short episode, but I wanted to get into some hallucination stuff. I'm still pretty tired. I don't have anything planned for races in the next few months. I think I got one in September, but other than that, I hope you guys are enjoying the podcast. We will see where this goes. Please shoot me any ideas or anything. You can DM me what you want me to talk about, or just reply to the question in the Spotify thing. But I think we are up on all platforms. So shout out to anyone that is listening to this thing. And until next time, stay elite, my friends.